What's going on, guys? It's Joe talking about the Kansas State Wildcats, and we're back to the basketball side of things again, and we're going to talk about some different things in today's video. But before we do, let me say we are closing in on 1,000 subs, and once we hit that mark, I'm going to be giving away a lavender quarter zip like the one I'm wearing now. So if you're interested in getting your hands on one of these lavender quarter zips, go ahead and consider subscribing. But let's get into things here today, quick and easy. I'm going to start off by prefacing a little bit, building up the background on what I saw. So there's a show called the Field of 68 podcast. I'm sure you've all seen it at some point. I actually hadn't watched the show, and it got randomly popped up on my algorithm, but that's where this came from. They're basically doing off-season grades for each basketball team, grading each basketball team based off of transfer portal additions, different guys coming into the program, losses, etc., coaching staff, whatever you want to go into on that. They got to K-State, and I watched the video, and I think to an extent it was a good video. I'm not coming for the guys when I say this, but a lot of the arguments and the reasoning they made for K-State made no sense to me. It was just almost blasphemous is how I describe it. It was just not correct. Like, I would say this, and I mean this as nice as possible. The arguments they chose to say as to why K-State can or can't be what they are, blah, 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 I'll get into all that. The arguments they used were from the perspective of people who had never watched Kansas State basketball in the regular season. And I'm sure that's not true. I'm sure they watched them. I'm sure they had some experience, but it reeked of guys who haven't seen the team play. That's all I could say about it. It seemed like guys who watched March Madness and saw this is what's happening here, move on to the next one, get it out, good to go. It didn't feel like they had watched K-State basketball throughout the regular season. They didn't. And they might have, and I don't mean to just take a shot at any of them that way, but let me start into some of their arguments, and I'll give you my reasoning as to why I feel that way. To start off, so I want to start off with the grades, and I've got no issue with the grades, to be honest. They gave K-State's offseason grade. One of them gave it a B, one of them gave it a B+. I apologize for not knowing the guys' names. This is my first time watching the show, so fellas, if you're watching this for some reason, I apologize. And once again, I am not coming for either of you guys on this. I'm just trying to jump onto the logic specifically. Now, basically, this is the argument that they both said. You can't possibly be what you were last year. You cannot possibly be the same team. Here's why I think that's garbage. I get that they have a lot to replace. And the argument there was, you lost 2 All-Americans. You're not going to have that happen. You can't figure that out. They made this argument of, okay, it's the same program, but it's a different team. You have to start fresh. You have to build a whole new team. The face value argument is, Jerome Tang built the team from the ground up. You had 2 players when you accepted this job at Kansas State. You had Marquise Noel, Ish Massoud. 2 guys who, yes, were massive for K-State, and they were big losses now looking back. But saying that you can't build a team like this again is ridiculous. It's ludicrous. I mean, Jerome Tang had 2 scholarship athletes when he took over from Bruce Weber. And saying that you have to start fresh, so it's going to be way too hard of a task to get to that point we were last year, that's not the right case. It's just not right to say that. That cannot be your main logic on this. Because you think about it, the staff literally did build the team last year. And you got to do the same thing this year, but now all you're doing is you're starting with more proven Big 12 basketball players. That's all you're doing. You've got a leg up on last year, if anything. Saying that it's a lot to replace and a lot to restart from, I get that. I get what you're saying. I get that losing Marquise Noel and losing Keontae Johnson might be a bit of a stretch. It's a tough play, but it's not to say that it's impossible. I mean, you don't have to replace them with 2 All-American players. You can get a more well-rounded team or a more team-oriented spot. Like, last year we played a lot through Marquise and through Keontae. Like, saying that that's the reason as to why we're going to be bad is because we don't have Marquise and Keontae, that's just not the argument. That can't just be the face value argument. Think about this. Going through all this, I made a list of all the different arguments that I had an issue with, so I'll kind of base my logic on a couple of those. And I can't reiterate enough, this is not a personal attack. It's not a shot at these guys. I'm sure they make great content, but it just didn't seem up to par for me. It didn't. So they made the argument of it's a lot to replace. You can't be the team you were last year. And we're very certain about that. It wasn't just like, well, maybe. It was you're not the same team. You're not. So they brought up examples of both Keontae leaving, of Marquise leaving, of Desi Sills leaving, Ish Massoud leaving, etc., etc. Those were 4 big losses, and I can't trip on that by any means. I'm not sitting here saying you're going to replace Marquise Noel, you're going to replace Keontae Johnson at face value. You're not going to take players that are 4- and 5-star command NBA-level dudes immediately. But you can do a damn close job of that, which is exactly what K-State did in the offseason. They brought this up next, that Jerome Tang gets the absolute best out of his players. Keontae Johnson, Marquise Noel, that was the peak pinnacle of college basketball versions of each players that we saw. And I don't mean to take a shot at either of them because they're unbelievable basketball players, and it's not that Jerome Tang's the only coach that could have led them to do what they did, but saying that those 2 players, it was only those guys. Hey, you lose those guys, you're done. Coach Tang, you're done. The argument they both made, and they both said they had trust in Tang, that he'll figure it out, etc., etc. The idea behind a lot of it was, at your peak, the combination of Tyler Perry, Nae'Qwan Tomlin, Arthur Kaluma will not scrape the ceiling as to what Keontae Johnson and Marquise Noel were, which is kind of ridiculous to me. I'll be honest. It's not that Marquise Noel was close to Tyler Perry in a certain sense or vice versa. I think Tyler Perry is a top guard in college basketball, especially at a bigger university now. 4-star players that transfer, joins Kansas State after being one of the best point guards in the transfer portal. Marquise Noel, unbelievable stud. The reason I disagree with what they're saying, they're focused on Keontae Johnson and Marquise Noel at the end of the season, not at the start. And hear me out on this, because that sounds a little bit stupid at first. They mentioned that Nae'Qwan Tomlin, Tyler Perry, Arthur Kaluma could become all Big 12 players and be really great basketball players at K-State. My question would be, how much of a gap is first-team All Big 12 and All-American? Because you know it's the best basketball conference in America. If you're first-team All Big 12, you're probably pretty damn close to All-American. Keontae Johnson, Marquise Noel, both first-team All Big 12. Both were All-Americans on the third team. Both some of the best players in the country. If Arthur Kaluma goes out and averages, 14, 15 points a game, is a first-team All Big 12 player, he's probably going to be at least third-team All-American. That's just the way it looks. Nae'Qwan Tomlin, same argument. He's a top 10 lottery-type player, Nae'Qwan Tomlin is. And I want to base this off their logic specifically. The way they said this, Jerome Tang gets the best out of every single player that comes through his system. And the way they describe the fact of you don't have a Keontae Johnson, you don't have a Marquise Noel on this team, that's ludicrous to me. That's ludicrous to me. It is 100%. Because you look at Tyler Perry, you look at Arthur Kaluma, you look at Nae'Qwan Tomlin, are you saying that they've hit their peak already? Are you saying that the difference between them at Creighton or them at North Texas cannot compare to what they could be at K-State? Like it's a sliver of a bit better, a half step better? That's not right. It's just not right. And I know maybe this sounds a little bit bitter, but I just had some issues with the video. Like saying that these three couldn't get close to Keontae Johnson or Marquise Noel was ridiculous to me. Because of course, Marquise Noel is an NBA player. Keontae Johnson is an NBA player. If Jerome Tang gets the best out of all three of these guys, they definitely have their best season of college basketball so far. And that's not like maybe. If Tang gets the best out of his guys, all three of these guys have career years and could go to the NBA. That's the way it looks. They're basically saying there's no Marquise, there's no Keontae to help us another year. If you're saying that Coach Tang gets the best out of all three of these players, all the best of his players, everybody on the roster, he gets the best out of them, don't you think Nae'Qwan Tomlin's going to be better than last season by a chunk? Arthur Kaluma in K-State's system, Tyler Perry at K-State's system. I mean, sure, even at their ceilings, we might not be pound for pound as good as our number 1 and number 2 guys were, but don't you think 1, 2, and 3 are better than last year's 1, 2, and 3? If you take that at face value, because our 1, 2, and 3 last year was probably Marquise, Keontae, Nae'Qwan Tomlin. And I know this is resting a lot on Nae'Qwan Tomlin being significantly better than he was last year, but I think that's almost a guarantee at this point. Nae'Qwan Tomlin has that. You've heard that all offseason. So the argument saying that you could not get to that level is kind of ridiculous to me. They mentioned, hey, you play a lot through your 2 All-Americans, so that's not going to happen this year. You're not going to have 2 All-Americans. This team does not need 2 All-Americans to beat a lot of teams in the Big 12, to beat a lot of teams in March. That's not the way I see this. So the argument they made, and there's 2 more I'll specify before this video is over. One of them said, and I can't remember which one of the names are, I apologize once again, guys, you're betting on less proven players than Keontae Johnson was last season. I love Keontae. Keontae is one of the best players to ever come through K-State, and I will always be high on Keontae. But to say we're betting on less proven players is ludicrous. Keontae Johnson hadn't touched the basketball court in 3.5 years, 3 years at least, since he played basketball. And I don't want to make it about his condition, but saying that Arthur Kaluma or Tyler Perry is less proven than Keontae Johnson, and I know what you're going to say. All SEC player, unbelievable player. There was 3 years of uncertainty in between that spot. Do we even know if this guy can make it through a season at this point? Do we know if his body's going to respond well? Do we know what's going to happen in the next level? I don't think it's safe to say that we're betting on less proven players than Keontae. Obviously, looking at it now, where Keontae is the 51st overall pick, hell of a player going to Oklahoma City, he's an NBA-type dude. Saying that at face value, sure. Comparing guys who haven't had their best year yet to 2 NBA players now makes a lot of sense. But it doesn't make sense at the start of the season. So saying that this team doesn't have a Marquise Noel and a Keontae Johnson, with all due respect, before we knew about these dudes, we didn't have a Marquise Noel and Keontae Johnson. Even when they both were committed to K-State, when Keontae steps on the court for K-State, we still didn't know the level of what Keontae could be. The argument is that even when Keontae Johnson committed to K-State, stepped on the court for K-State, none of us fans, none of us commentators, none of us sports people knew what we were getting out of Keontae. So saying that there won't be a Keontae and there won't be a Marquise doesn't make sense. It doesn't. because you have no idea what this team could be yet. Nobody does. I don't have an idea. These guys don't have an idea. I'm sure the coaching staff has a general idea, but saying that we're not a top 25 team under any circumstance. Basically, the argument was, you're not a top 25 team. On paper, you're not a top 25 team. I disagree with the you're not a top 25 team thing, because if all the other glazing over Coach Tang and the coaching staff here is true as to what you're saying, you're a top 25 team because Tyler Perry, Nae'Qwan Tomlin, Arthur Kaluma could all be NBA dudes. And even if you want to just shorten that list to two and say that Nae'Qwan Tomlin, Arthur Kaluma could be NBA players, the gap between those two and Marquise Noel and Keontae Johnson isn't some massive 100-yard gap. I mean, it's closer than you think. If Nae'Qwan Tomlin at his best is averaging, 16 points, 17 points, 8 rebounds, that's huge. That's leading the team in rebounds. That's leading the team probably in points. If Arthur Kaluma averages 15 a game, Keontae and Marquise were about 17 points per game, 17 and 16-ish in that sense at the end of the season. I just don't agree with the logic, if that's what you're going to base this off of. You can't just sit here and say that because you're losing Keontae and because you're losing Marquise, you won't be this team. Nobody, including you guys, including me, knew we had that at the start of the season. You didn't. But looking back now, it makes perfect sense to say, you know what? These are 2 All-Americans. You're not going to have that. We don't know. We could have 3 All-Americans in all 3 of these guys. I just saw the video and I wanted to toss some comments out there. I just think it's ridiculous for anybody, including myself, including K-State people, to say what this team can or can't be at the moment. Outside of just leaving it wide open and saying Coach Tang gets the best out of his players, I'll agree with that statement. I'll agree with a couple of their statements. Like, they both were kind. They were both supportive of Coach Tang and everything that's going on in Manhattan. But I just think they felt like guys that watched 3 games in March Madness and said, you know what? Hey, Nae'Qwan Tomlin, Marquise Noel, Keontae Johnson, these guys are studs. They will be at K-State for a while. And once they're gone, this team's going back. This is just a once-in-a-lifetime class. Tang got this class to be what it is. And I know Marquise is already there, and you saw some of his flashes with Bruce Weber, but even guys who watched the team last year didn't think Marquise Noel could be as good as he is this year. It's because he put in work, Coach Tang put in work, this coaching staff put in work. That's where I'm resting my argument at. So guys, once again, just want to say, that's just my thoughts. I could be way off on this, but I think it's just ludicrous for anybody to say they know what this team could be. That's what I'm basing this argument off of. Nobody knows what's going to happen yet, so passing it off like they will be leaps and bounds worse than last year's team, I disagree with that. Absolutely. Because nobody knows what the ceiling is. Nobody knows how high this team can go. But making it sound like no matter what, you're not a top 25 team right now, that's ludicrous to me. So that's where I wanted to rest my argument. But guys, thank you so much for watching. If you want to watch their video, get some of your own thoughts. I know I'm being a little bit harsh on it, and there's a lot of great things they do say about K-State, so go check their channel out for sure. I'll leave the link in the description for you guys to check out and see what you thought about what they said. Be sure and like the video, do whatever you want to, so I appreciate you guys a ton, and we will see you in the next one. I hope you have a wonderful day, guys, and thanks for tolerating my rant once again.